Hi everyone, it's Ray from Euro Football Star. We are coming live from the home of the Camp Nou in Barcelona in Spain. Now we've got a special guest on today, all the way back in Australia, in Sydney, and this person is called Katherine. And Katherine is involved in elite level sports, and some of the things that we do at Euro Football Star, especially for our female athletes and for our female players who are going through this journey of developing as a player. We thought it would be useful coming from a slightly different angle than football, but still a professional athlete background, to try and just ask some questions of Katherine, and also to see if we could get some valid and great information for some of our athletes. So I think we've got Katherine on the line at the moment in Sydney in Australia. Good morning or good afternoon, Katherine, where it is for you.
Good morning for you.
Now, Katherine, just for some of our listeners, can you just tell us or the sport that you've been involved in for most of your life?
Yeah, so karate is the sport, and probably since I was about 12 years old.
Very
Long
good.
time.
So it's a long time. So how long in total have you sort of had an interest in the sport? Was it since 12, or did you have an interest before you started training and competing, or?
Well, interestingly, when I was really young, I would say about 6, I started doing a very different style of karate. And I had absolutely no interest at all. I think I just wasn't focused. I didn't have the coordination. It just wasn't for me. And then when I was 12, being a very competitive nature, somebody at school mentioned that they were doing karate, and I was like, right, that's it, I'm going back. And I think being a bit older and having a bit more understanding and doing other sports and being more coordinated, immediately I was like, I absolutely love this. And that was that was it. That was where it all started. So yeah,
Amazing.
12.
That's amazing. Yeah, because we get a lot of our players who start the journey at about 5 or 6, but they probably really work out that they start to love it around about that 11 or 12, and they start to make decisions themselves to actually participate in the sport. Now, out of interest, when you obviously got into karate and you started taking it seriously, who was it who sort of give you a little bit of a nudge? Was it mum? Was it dad? Or was it someone else? Or was it just something that you decided yourself to do?
I think probably originally when I was younger, it would have been mum. Mum, I can thank mum for everything. When I was older, it was my decision, and I think, like you said, I think once you start making your own decision and you can decide that you're interested, it's a whole different ball game. If you're being forced to do it, you may not continue, but if you make the decision, I think that's kind of where you start to realize if there's any real talent or if you're going to get anywhere in the sport. But mum definitely was the support network. She was pretty much my taxi, driving me around to training and competitions, and you would understand.
Yeah, I do. Well, it's funny, like we're called Uber mums or Uber dads now, but I think going back when me and you played sports, there was no such a word as Uber. It was taxi.
I know. Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
that's really good to hear, because we've got a lot of really good players that work with Euro Football Star, and it's quite interesting that it always does take that mum or dad who sort of guide them in the direction of the sport rather than pushing them into it. And they're ironically the ones who come out and end up making it in professional football or in any sport. So that's it's interesting that you've got your mum, and thank God for mum to help you with that one.
Oh yeah, mum's the best.
Now, over your journey and over participating in karate over the years, what sort of been like one of your inspirational coaches? Has there been one in particular that stood out? And what's the one thing that they taught you that's really stuck with you, going from being a junior athlete into an open women's athlete?
Yeah, I have some really great coaches now. But when I was younger, or when I started the journey, around that kind of age of 12, I think that's a really important age. You're very impressionable, and the people that you surround yourselves with are very important. And my sensei at the time, he was like family. All of his students, he really, really cared about you. And I always think it's really super interesting. You get a lot of ego in this type of sport now, whereas back then, and certainly with him, all he wanted was to do everything that he could to make you better than him, take you to your limit, do everything that he possibly could. And I think a lot of character building, particularly with the martial art, so much character building. And I think the one thing that always stuck with me, we have what we call, it's the dojo kun. It's like the etiquette or the oath that you kind of agree to. And the first line of that is to seek perfection of character.
Yeah.
And I think that really, really resonated with me. You go in there and you go hard. You go hard, and you probably do things that you wouldn't expect to do in any other environment. Obviously, it's a contact sport, but to be able to have the respect to then walk out of the dojo and be friends with these people is super important. And I've never known that in any other environment other than karate. So he had a lot to do with that character building, etiquette, sportsmanship. I think it's super important, particularly in a martial art, not to have this ego.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. It's one of the things that we find in football. We really emphasize, and I literally get asked all the time, what's the secret to becoming a professional football player? And as a coach as well, one of the big things that I always impress on families and players, it's two things. It's hard work, and lots of hard work. And the second thing's attitude, and how you act on and off the field, or, you know, on and off the dojo, no matter where your sport is. And they laugh at me and go, no, it can't be that simple. And I'm like, it is that simple. You've just got to be prepared to put the hard yards in. Who wants to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go on a run just to keep your fitness up? Who wants to go and do a beat test to just try and increase your speed? No one wants to do it. And parents, I don't think they want to understand that it is this easy if you just follow those two key things. And it touches on exactly what you just said, those key things that you've taken from learning martial arts. Now, the next question, Katherine. Obviously, I've got 2 daughters, and I know how hard, and I've seen it over the years for females in sports and some of the obstacles that you've got to overcome. But what was one of the things that you found growing up as a junior, being a female in a sport? And if you had an obstacle, how did you overcome it? Can you think back to any obstacles that might relate?
Yeah, I think there was a few. I think one of the major things that I noticed is that when you get to a certain age, the girls start to drop off, and whether that's like lack of interest or with karate, they get their black belt and they're like, right, okay, I'm done. They get to a certain level, or they have other interests, or a boyfriend, or whatever it is, school, university. It gets really difficult to compete at a certain level when you can't train with people at your level. So I also find that now, like, there aren't many. My age category that I currently compete in is huge. It's 21 to 39. But whilst it is a big category, that's the category where people are starting to get married and have kids. And, you know, it's hard as an adult, but certainly as a junior, not having the availability or the support particularly from the boys, you know, they're like, oh, you do karate. And I'm like, yeah. They don't understand what it takes to get to that level. It's interesting.
It is, and I'm going through it now at the moment with our eldest daughter. I think I've told you she plays tennis, and that's one of the things that we've sort of seen as a negative, is the drop off of girls at those ages, because she can't compete. But we've sort of seen it as a positive as well. Not like now where she'll just go and play against the boys or the men, or she'll go and actually compete against open age women. And I think the big thing that we impress with our athletes is we've got to try and spin these negatives into positives. And I think, so just out of interest, when you were getting sort of higher up in the karate world and you were getting stronger and better, do you train with males, and would you compete ever with them? Or
yeah, I would say I was probably at my peak when I was at that 16, 17 kind of age. And that was when we would go to squad trainings for Great Britain. I was competing back in the UK then. And I would probably be the only girl there. And I tell you what, you get pretty good. You move. When you're standing in front of one of the senior men and you're a 16-year-old girl, you get out of the way. So it definitely made me a much stronger athlete. You get some hits, you learn to take that. And I think, well, it was interesting that that feeling of the respect and the etiquette really comes through. A lot of guys have a bit of a thing about fighting women, but in that environment, showing, I felt like they were giving me respect by not holding back. So yeah, I definitely, and that's when I was going to world championships and winning medals.
That's amazing.
Different story now, a little bit older.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got some really good females in our program at the moment who are 11 and 12, and because they're that strong, they're actually now being allowed to play in the boys' competition, which is an amazing opportunity for them. And yeah, I just think from that developmental aspect, it's amazing. Now, just going back onto our aspiring female athletes at Euro Football Star, if there's one bit of advice you could give them, because they're going to be watching and tuning into this, what would you give them? What's the one bit of advice you've learned over the years, whether it be as a junior or as an adult?
I think you have to, if you really want it, you've got to go for it. Everything else will wait. Obviously, in terms of education and things like that, that's important, and you need to make sure you have that. But relationships and things, if there is an issue with you doing this, there's an issue, full stop. I think being able to invest your time and your energy into something that you love, you just have to do it. You're not going to be that good forever. You're not going to be that young forever. You're not going to be that strong forever. And if you've got the opportunity, you have to go for it. Otherwise, you'll regret it. At the end of the day, you don't know what the relationship is going to come to in the end. And if they're not supportive of you doing that, imagine your boyfriend turns around and says to you, "Oh my God, I'm competing for Australia in soccer." You'd be like, "Oh my God, amazing! My boyfriend does this."
Yeah.
But when you flip it around, why would you not, as a female, do the same thing? And why would he not support you in the same way? So I think definitely make sure you've got the right people around you that are willing to support you to be able to do what it is that you want to do and achieve the potential that you have.
Yeah, that's an amazing piece of advice. It's sort of strings along with myself, with having two daughters as well who are heavily involved in sports, but also with the football players on our programs as well. And I think you're completely spot on, because one of the case studies that was done at Loughborough University in the UK, and it was why females were dropping out of sport at the age of 14 and 15. And a lot of it was down to obviously going through those changes that females go through the teenage years, but then also a lot of it was to do with boyfriends and relationships, and they were putting more time and energy into that. And I think it can be a touchy one for parents and for girls to watch and to listen to, but I think it's an amazing piece of advice that you're completely spot on, that if they really want to be in a relationship with you, they'll fully support you in your dreams and aspirations. And that's it. Now, up to yourself, Katherine. So you've got an upcoming competition, and could you just tell everyone who's tuning in what the competition is and what it is you're training and you're going to be competing in?
Yeah, so we have the World Championships coming up in August this year. It's in Hungary. It's actually been postponed. So we have World Championships once every 3 years, but obviously due to COVID, it was scheduled to be in Japan. And with all of the changes and with Japan keeping their borders closed for so much longer, they actually postponed it by a year and moved it to Hungary, which is a shame because Japan is like, goals for karateka. But
amazing.
Yeah, Hungary in August. It's going to be a bit of a hectic time. I think with work and training, I've calculated about 60 flights between now and then. So,
oh, good luck with that. Well, that's exciting news, and it's funny you were saying that, because it's like we're due to be at a competition for football in Barcelona, but it gets cancelled because of a pandemic, and then it gets reset back up. But we have to go to Rhyl in Wales instead.
Oh no! Wales is great. I'm sure it's beautiful.
And it's not against any of our Welsh viewers. Ryl's a lovely place. But it's like Japan or Hungary, I get that. But I suppose as well, from a motivational point of view, that's going to be interesting to see the athletes who, regardless of the environment they're in, can still raise the game and be motivated to train and compete there. So I suppose that's going to
Yeah.
be an interesting one for you to maybe get an edge on some of the other fighters. Now,
Well, it
next
was
question I've got to ask you.
go on.
If you didn't go into karate, what sport do you think you would have went into and why?
Oh, good question. Well, I did do horse riding quite competitively for a while, probably
Very
until I was
good.
about 16. And I loved it. That I think the relationship that you have with a horse is uncomparable to anything else. So that was otherwise athletics. I was a bit of a sprinter.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, one of those two. Horse riding probably gets capped at a certain. It's expensive.
Yeah.
Expensive.
I completely hear you with that one. My father-in-law is actually a racehorse trainer, and I can see the
Oh
expense
wow.
just in racehorse training. So things like dressage, you not forget about it. You need to be a billionaire to compete in that sport.
When you get to a certain level, that's it. Yeah, you either have to be the best in the world or you're not doing it anymore.
Now, next question I've got for you. In regards to being a female and competing and being an athlete, do you think it's a lot easier now and there's a lot more acceptance of it than there was maybe 10, 15 years ago? Or do you think you've never had any issues with that as a female being involved in a sport?
I think for the sport that I do, not much has changed, but it is really nice to see, particularly in things like the NRL, they're really starting to try and push the women's a lot more. And you see the professional men trying to push the women as well, which I think is really great with that they're
Yeah.
trying to get the same kind of exposure. So I think there's definitely more acceptance and it's definitely there's more support there. But for my sport, not a huge amount has changed. I think we've always had women because it's a Japanese sport as well. I think it's always been the same. Really, it's not.
No,
It's not
that's
television. It's
amazing.
not, so yeah, it's
I
always
think
been good.
unfortunately we've had I think females haven't been overly accepted in football over the years, but I think where we are now, it's phenomenal. I mean, even just looking in the backdrop, you can see up there
Yeah,
the three stars of Barcelona. They've got a female up there, and I think 5, 10 years ago they were doing that, but I think it was more of let's just tick the box exercise, and they just making sure they were ticking boxes to say that they've got a
yeah,
female up there. But I mean, I went back to the UK in September last year for a football tour, and we went to a game, Liverpool versus Everton, and there was 42,000 people at the stadium to watch an all women's game, which was just unbelievable. And then the following day, that record was broken. Arsenal versus Tottenham Hotspur at the Emirates Stadium, and they actually had over 60,000 there watching a women's game. So it's so pleasing for me, obviously, because I've got a lot of female athletes working with us, but also having two daughters to see that, especially in
yeah,
football now, it's sort of not frowned upon. Or why is she playing football? And
yeah.
it's a good career as well now. I mean, financially, they're getting a lot of support, which is an amazing thing.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more specific. If you think about tennis, we've had some incredible female athletes in tennis that have just made moves in the industry. So it's just nice to see that other sports are following suit.
Yeah, and just to finish up, mate, the final question. So we're talking about finances and females
Oh,
being involved in sport. So from your perspective, is there a lot of financial support in karate for women, but for the athletes in general? And if there isn't, how have you come, over those hurdles? How have you managed to get around it?
well, no, the answer is no. It's not because it's not a professional sport and it's not televised or promoted at all. It's always kind of been you're supporting yourself, which I think is probably another reason why a lot of people start to drop off when they get to a certain age, because it's difficult when you're working to be able to do this, particularly in Australia. We have to go a long way to compete at a high level.
Yeah,
So I'm lucky now that I have a job that's flexible and that I can afford to do that. It's a lot of expense, but this time is the first time ever that I've had some amazing people offer to give me a little bit of sponsorship and support, which I actually struggled in the beginning to accept because I've never had it. So
yeah,
that was an interesting feeling for me. It was almost a little bit of imposter syndrome of why would you want to sponsor me, and why would you want to support me to do this? Because I've never had it before. But it was really nice to see that they were like, no, oh my God, of course we want to be able to help you go and do that. It's the other side of the world. There's a lot of expense. I'm traveling to Sydney once or twice a month. It just all adds up. So when you think about $20,000 to compete in a world championships, not everyone can do that.
It's a lot of money. It is a lot of money. Yeah, and that's what we're really interested to touch on, because we actually choose athletes to go with us every year over to the UK to experience that lifestyle and to train and play and compete. And we're at a point where we actually take 16 players over, all expenses paid, at $8,000 per person, which is a good thing from us as a company, but also we can't afford to take everyone. So there is athletes that unfortunately do have to pay. We actually put in a sponsorship team a couple of years ago, and we've got a lovely lady called Tali, who's our saviour, and she helps families raise sponsorship and money for their trips overseas, and to help them so they don't have to pay out that $8,000. And that's one of the things that I'd love to get off you when we finish this call as well, Katherine. If you have any links or fundraising links you could share with us, what we'll do is, guys, we'll drop them in the bottom of these notes on this particular podcast. And guys, if you'd like to reach out and help Katherine with her journey, because it is a big thing competing for your city or for your state, but the fact that you're going over to compete in nationals. Now, just let me get this right. So you're born in England, yeah?
Yeah. Yes.
So you're competing for England in this Karate World Championships? What?
I'm competing for Australia. Listen, I'm an Aussie now.
Believe it or not, with this Liverpool accent, I'm an Australian as well.
This will be my second one for Australia. This will be my 5th in total, but my 2nd for Australia. I actually felt really weird about it the first time. I was like, oh, I don't feel right competing for Australia, but I am a citizen, so I've been almost half my life in Australia. So. Oh,
very good, mate. Now that's exciting. Now, that was a bit of a wind up and a joke. I know you're actually represent for Australia. I thought I'd try and stitch you up. So what we'll do is, everyone, we'll share the links below for Katherine, and we're going to try and help her raise as much money for this World Championships as well, because I know how hard it is for families and for players and to raise these types of money to go overseas. And I think Japan definitely would have been a cheaper option, but now they've set in place Hungary, it's going to be a little bit extra money needed to get all the way that far. So, Katherine, I'd just like to say thank you for myself and the team at Euro Football Star coming live from Barcelona. We really, really appreciate your time today. And
thank you.
And we're going to be coming live from Istanbul in June for the Champions League final. And we're going to be there for 8 or 9 days. So if it's not too much of your time, and if you can take half an hour out of your schedule, we'd love to catch up with you again, just to see how your training's going, and just have a catch up with you.
We'll be getting very close to Worlds by then. So yeah, great.
Awesome, Katherine. Thanks very much, Katherine. And guys, thank you for everyone tuning in and joining myself and Katherine today live from Barcelona. Thank you.
Thank you so much. See you.